Some criticism or feedback hurts worse than others. So if you've been hit by criticism, critique, or feedback recently that sort of hit your sore spots, this is for you. As leaders by title or action, we know we're going to get feedback. We need to get feedback. That's appropriate. That's expected. Awesome. That's not what I'm talking about here. I'm talking about the kind of criticism sort of punches you in the gut, gets you into a mental spiral, has you questioning yourself, that sort of a thing. Criticism stings the most when it challenges our ego identity, when it challenges the way that we want to be seen by others. I have a recent example of this because I got punched where it hurts very recently. I was facilitating a group of strangers. We were coming together to have a conversation about what people were doing in the activism realm around the state so that we could see if there weren't ways that we could maybe collaborate or expedite. None of us knew each other. It was just an informal conversation. They didn't know me. They didn't know anything about me. And one of the people in the meeting said something that, to me, my interpretation implied that they thought that I'm a bad facilitator and that they thought that my intentions were selfish in leading the meeting. Now, again, I don't know if that's really what they thought. That's how I took it. And we all know how our brains work. Sometimes we hear things, maybe that is what that person thought. Maybe it is not at all what that person thought. It doesn't really matter, actually. What matters is it hit me in my ego identity, and I had an ego identity reaction to it internally. And so what is this ego identity thing? This is really there's a lot to unpack here, but maybe a simple way to think about it is we all want to be seen a certain way. Sometimes that way that we want to be seen is completely true. Sometimes it's not. Either way, we want to be seen that way. So my ego identity, part of what I'm strongly attached to is the identity of being a good facilitator. I happen to have a ton of experience. I actually teach facilitation. So I have an attachment to an identity of a good facilitator. So when somebody implies, intentionally or unintentionally, that I'm not a good facilitator, oof, that's some hard criticism. The other thing that came up in that meeting, in the way that their comments came out, was the implication that maybe I didn't have good intentions. That's another spot where I have a strong attachment to an identity of someone with good intentions, someone with altruistic intentions, someone who wants to be helpful, wants to be in service of others. And definitely within my psyche, there is a need to never be seen as someone who's selfish, right? We can get into conditioning from society, being female, yada, yada, doesn't matter. But what matters is if somebody's going to imply that I'm selfish in front of a bunch of strangers who I'm just getting to know, ooh, that criticism hurts. So now you know the kinds of things that I'm talking about and what I mean by ego identity. This kind of criticism hurts more, not because it's more true or less true, but because we don't want to be seen that way. And so we have what I term an ego identity reaction. And normally it's internal. Like on the outside at that meeting, nobody probably saw any difference. I did my job. I took care of it. I facilitated my way through. But internally, and after the meeting, I started the spiral. I felt anxious. I felt frustrated. I felt annoyed. I had the conversation playing in my head of how it went, a conversation playing in my head of what I might say in the future, rationalization, the impulse to prove myself to be an excellent facilitator, the impulse to talk them into believing the things about me that I want them to see in me. This spiraling that you might have experienced, the overthinking, the replaying the conversations, feeling anxious, feeling frustrated, feeling tightness in your body, feeling ashamed, maybe your inner critic pops up and starts telling you how much you suck and how they're right and you're just a fraud. That inner experience that you're having when you've had painful criticism or painful feedback, that inner experience, it doesn't have to be like that. We don't have to suffer through that. There's a different way to cope. The first step to having a different experience is by getting to know yourself a little bit, doing more self-reflection. looking for patterns about your reactions to criticism that hurts or to feedback that hurts. For me, I know I have two coping strategies that for a long time were my go-tos. And I always think of them as a boom or a bust. And for me, the boom was a ton of output of energy to prove them wrong, prove that I'm good, prove that I can be trusted, prove all the things. It's like this hustly energy. The perfectionist comes up. It's really driven by the inner critic. It's a ton of output and a lot of disconnection from self. So that's a boom reaction that I've definitely had in the past. The bust reaction that I've had in the past is to just withdraw. I mean, I'd just be mad, like, F them. They don't know anything about me. What do they know about anything? Well, fine. If that's how they feel, then I don't need to be here for this. I can peace out and just never attend another meeting. And that also feels super crappy and disconnecting from them and disconnecting from myself. And an interesting thing of both the boom and bust reaction is there's always self-abandonment. That doesn't feel great either. So I'm so glad to tell you that I do something different now. I have a different internal experience when those things happen. I know what my reactions are. So when I feel that boom or bust initiating, I recognize it. I'm no longer in it, so attached to it. It's like that's there and that's present, but also there's more of me present. And I'm able to sort of take this part that's all wound up, and then I step over here. It doesn't move necessarily. It doesn't necessarily go away, but there's another part of me that I make space for, which is the wise, grounded, higher knowing, higher self to show up. So once I have space from this reaction and I allow the wiser self to arrive, I can start to observe and be less attached to my reactions. Now I'm starting to have more choice. Another thing I do differently is I make space for the emotional reaction to resolve. When we have an ego identity reaction to criticism, it's actually an emotional response. It is a hurt response. It can trigger anger. It can trigger self-doubt, sadness. It's an emotional response. But in professional settings, we're always taught to deal with uncomfortable circumstances with our mental body, with our brain, not with our physical or emotional bodies. And so we get stuck. That's why it can often feel like it takes forever to sort of get over those kinds of interactions, because you're trying to get over an emotional response using your brain. You need to get over and through your emotional response or your emotional reaction by allowing the emotional reaction to complete. So remember, our emotions typically come in the form of a wave. So there's a trigger, and then it sort of builds, and then it crests, and then it starts to dissipate, and then hopefully resolve. Sometimes there's a couple of waves that we go through before it fully resolves. But what happens is we get a trigger, it starts to build, we hijack ourselves and go into our mental approaches. So that's like I turn my attention to boom or bust approach, which are actually more attempted mental body approaches to solve the problem. Instead of hijacking myself in the midst of the rise of the emotion, what I do is I find some quiet space for myself away from the dynamic where I can just let myself feel the pain and the hurt of feeling judged and misunderstood. And so by having that reaction, allowing my higher wisdom self to also be present, getting some space where I can be present with myself and allow myself to fully feel the hurt, the pain, the disappointment, whatever it is that I feel from being misunderstood, it can crest so then it can dissipate and then it can resolve. Now that I've let my body have a full emotional reaction, the full emotional wave, get to the point of dissipation, all of that charged up energy that was gonna go boom or go bust, it's not there anymore. Now all of a sudden, that energy is gone, and I'm back to feeling grounded, to being connected to my truth, my inner wisdom, my self-knowing, and I can make choice about how I approach it. I don't have to hustle for someone's approval. I don't have to disconnect from them in order to protect myself. I can keep showing up with confidence, with clarity, and get back to the actual work. Because here's the other part. In addition to this whole process feeling like shit on the inside, it distracts us from the real work. And for me, in this example I'm giving you, if I had lingered in this space of hustling or disconnecting, that takes time, that takes energy, it's exhausting. And now I'm distracted from the real work at hand, which is what are we all doing around the state and how can we support each other? Now that I've dealt with this ego identity reaction, quickly, smoothly dissipated the energy back in my body, back in myself, back in a grounded space of leadership, I can return more quickly to the real issues at hand and we can get back to work. So I hope that's helpful. I'll attach a link to an article that kind of goes more into detail about this. Also, if this kind of stuff is interesting to you, this is the kind of thing that we dive into in Root to Rise, our women's leadership circle. So I will also post a link to that if you're curious. If you're watching this summer, early fall of 2025, we've got a circle starting in October that you can join. Anyway, stay strong. Don't get swept away when your ego gets hit or confronted with something it doesn't like. You aren't just that. There's another part of you that is wise and grounded and mature and loving and can help take care of that more fragile part of you.